The clinking of silverware against porcelain was a delicate sound, a fragile counterpoint to the thick, unspoken tension that saturated the air in the ridiculously overpriced restaurant. To an outside observer, they were a family portrait, the successful young couple treating the aging patriarch to a fine meal. But a closer look revealed the cracks in the facade. The son, David, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his tie feeling more like a noose with every passing second. His wife, Melissa, wore a smile as sharp and brittle as spun sugar, a confection of civility that barely concealed the bitter condescension beneath. And then there was Arthur Vance, the father, the guest of honor, a man who seemed to be carved from silence itself. He sat with a stillness that was not passive but contained, like a dormant volcano. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, weren't vacant. They were watchful, taking in the room, the people, the subtle currents of human interaction with an economy of focus that was unsettling. Melissa had just finished a thinly veiled critique of his small, rented apartment, framing it as a loving concern for his safety and comfort, when it was clearly an argument for moving him into an assisted living facility. "It's just so far away, Arthur," she'd said, her voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. "And with your leg, we worry. A nice community with people your own age, activities, it would be so much better for you." Arthur didn't respond. He simply took a slow sip of water, his gaze unwavering. It was this silence that infuriated her the most. It was a wall she couldn't breach, a refusal to engage on her terms that she interpreted as senile stubbornness. He was, in her carefully curated world of promotions, acquisitions, and social climbing, an anomaly, a relic, a man who had lived a long life and had, by her metrics, absolutely nothing to show for it. He was just a quiet old man, lost in the fog of his memories, a gentle burden to be managed. But then his phone, an old, simple flip model, vibrated against the white tablecloth. The buzz was quiet, but in the strained silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Arthur placed his fork down with deliberate care and picked it up. He flipped it open, his thumb, scarred and thick, pressing the button to illuminate the small screen. His eyes narrowed just for a fraction of a second. The flicker was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A sudden, razor-sharp focus that burned away the quiet facade, revealing something ancient, something disciplined, something dangerous beneath. The message was stark, devoid of pleasantries. "Get up and go. Now, don't say anything to your son." To them, to Melissa and David, he was just a confused old man abandoning his family at dinner, succumbing to a moment of geriatric whim. But what they didn't know, what they could never possibly comprehend, was that the message on his phone was not from this world. It was a ghost, an echo from a life they couldn't imagine, a life of shadow and steel, a life that was about to save their own. Welcome to Stories of a Silent Age, the channel where we believe that the greatest heroes walk among us, often unseen, their medals not worn on a uniform but carried in the quiet chambers of their hearts. If you believe in honoring the silent sacrifices of the truly brave, the ones who ask for nothing and give everything, then make sure you are subscribed and have those notifications turned on. Because today's story is a powerful, gut-wrenching reminder that still waters run deeper than the ocean, and that the quiet old man in the corner might just be the one holding the whole world together. The air in the restaurant was a symphony of manufactured elegance, but for Arthur, it was just noise. The real world, the one that mattered, had just announced its presence with 16 capital letters on a 2-inch screen. His entire being shifted into a different state of awareness. The ambient chatter faded into a dull roar. The scent of truffle oil and seared scallops was replaced by the phantom smell of cordite and ozone. His training, buried for 2 decades under a carefully constructed life of quietude, surged to the surface. It wasn't a memory. It was a reflex, a hardwired response to a stimulus he had prayed he would never encounter again. The life Arthur Vance had built for himself was one of deliberate, almost monastic simplicity. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building that had seen better days, overlooking a small, unremarkable park. The space was small, meticulously clean, and sparse. There were no awards on the walls, no framed commendations, No photographs of him in uniform. To do so would have been a lie, for the units he had served with did not officially exist. Their operations erased from the records, their successes and failures buried under layers of classification so deep they were practically myth. His possessions were few but chosen. A row of well-worn books on history and philosophy. A single, heavy armchair that faced the window. A small, functional kitchen where he prepared simple meals for himself. The only hint of a past life was a small, smooth, dark river stone that sat on his windowsill, polished to a dull sheen by years of handling. It was from a place he could never speak of, a memento of a promise made to a man who had not come home. His days were structured by a rhythm of his own making. He rose before the sun, his body, despite the persistent ache in his left knee from a piece of shrapnel that was still embedded there, moving with a practiced economy. He would walk in the park as the city woke up, his limp a quiet testament to a sacrifice no one knew he had made. He would read. He would watch the world from his window. He asked for nothing from anyone. He was a ghost in his own life, and that was how he wanted it. This stoic solitude was a universe away from the life of his son. David and Melissa lived in a sleek, glass and steel condominium downtown, a monument to their ambition. Their home was filled with the latest technology, with abstract art that was more of an investment than a joy, with furniture that was beautiful to look at but uncomfortable to sit in. It was a showroom for success, a carefully curated stage upon which they performed their lives. David, Arthur knew, was a good man at his core, but he was caught in the gravitational pull of his wife's relentless drive. He loved his father, but he was also embarrassed by him, by his simplicity, by his refusal to play the game of modern life. Melissa's view was far less complicated. To her, Arthur was a failure, a man who had drifted through life, working odd jobs after leaving the military with a vague, honorable discharge, never accumulating wealth or status. She saw his humility not as a virtue but as a lack of ambition. His silence was not wisdom but emptiness. She resented the checks David wrote for his father's rent, seeing it as money that could be better spent on a new car or a vacation to an exotic locale where she could post curated photos on social media. She was the architect of the chasm that had opened between father and son. "Honestly, David," she had said just weeks before, her voice a sharp weapon disguised as concern. "We can't keep subsidizing his lifestyle. It's not sustainable. He needs to be practical. He's done nothing to prepare for his old age." David had offered a weak defense. "He served his country, Mel." Melissa had laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Lots of people served, David. They don't all expect a handout for the rest of their lives. They build careers. They invest." He just stopped. What did he even do? He won't talk about it. Probably some boring desk job. Clerk typist, the discharge papers said. A glorified secretary. The phrase had become her favorite barb, a way to diminish him, to reduce a life she couldn't comprehend into a single, dismissive title. The weight of these conversations, these 1,000 tiny cuts of disrespect, hung in the air at the restaurant table, a toxic cloud that the fancy food and expensive wine could not dispel. And now the text message had arrived. It was a key, turning a lock in a part of his soul he had long since sealed away. The world of clerk typists and quiet apartments was dissolving, and the world of ghosts and shadows was bleeding through. Arthur read the message one more time, though the words were already burned into his mind. "Get up and go. Now, don't say anything to your son." It was a command, not a request. It was a specific protocol from a life he had shed like a snakeskin 2 decades ago. Watcher protocol, condition black. It meant a threat was active, imminent, and directly connected to a member of his old unit or their family. And the final line, the injunction against speaking to his son, was the most chilling part. It meant that David was either the target or somehow compromised. There was no room for debate, no time for explanation. Hesitation was death. A part of him, the civilian part he had so carefully cultivated, screamed in protest. It wanted to stay, to explain, to avoid the inevitable scene, to spare his son the confusion and his daughter-in-law the ammunition for her next tirade. but that part of him was a thin veneer over a core of forged steel. The man who had been Sergeant Major Arthur, the Ghost Vance, was now in control. The protocol was absolute. Trust was absolute. His body responded before his mind had finished processing the conflict. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. The sound cut through the restaurant's low hum, drawing a few curious glances. He stood up. His movements were fluid, decisive, devoid of the hesitation of an old man. They were the movements of a predator. Melissa looked up, her fork halfway to her mouth, her expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Arthur? What are you doing? Are you with us? Or is your phone more interesting than your family?" Her voice was laced with the familiar, sarcastic edge. David looked at him, his face etched with concern. "Dad? Are you okay? You look pale. Is it your leg?" Arthur's gaze met his son's for a fleeting moment. He saw the love there, buried under layers of frustration and marital pressure. It was for David that he had to do this. He couldn't offer a comforting lie. The protocol forbade it. Any explanation could be a fatal mistake. "I have to go," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used when communicating essential information under fire. Concise, final. Melissa's carefully constructed smile finally shattered. "Go?" she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "Go where? We just ordered our main courses. Arthur, this is absolutely unacceptable." "David, do something." She looked at her husband, her eyes demanding he take control of his errant father. David stood as well, placing a placating hand on Arthur's arm. "Dad, what's wrong? Just tell us what's going on. Sit down, please. We can talk about whatever it is." The touch felt alien. Arthur's entire being was screaming at him to move, to get out, to follow the protocol that had kept him and his men alive in situations that defied imagination. He gently removed his son's hand. "I can't," he said, the two words carrying the weight of an unbreakable oath. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and placed two $50 bills on the table, more than enough to cover his share. He didn't look at Melissa's face, which was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't look at his son's, which was a canvas of confusion and hurt. He simply turned and walked away. The public nature of the act, the perceived humiliation, was a tactical necessity. It would cement their belief that he was unstable, ensuring they wouldn't follow. But for Melissa, it was a declaration of war. She saw it as the ultimate act of disrespect, a public rejection of her and the life she had offered, and she was not going to let it stand. The walk from the table to the restaurant's grand exit felt like a mile. Every eye in the room seemed to be on him, 100 pairs of judgmental lenses dissecting his every move. He could feel Melissa's fury like a physical heat on his back. As he pushed through the ornate glass doors into the cool night air of the valet area, he heard her voice, sharp and high-pitched. "Arthur, you get back here right now." He didn't stop. He couldn't. He kept walking toward the valet stand, his limp more pronounced now, a combination of old injury and the immense psychological pressure of the moment. Melissa caught up to him, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. David was right behind her, his face a mess of apologies for the scene they were causing. "How dare you?" Melissa hissed, her voice low and venomous now that they were in a semi-public space. "After everything we do for you, after we take you to a place like this, you just walk out without a word? What is wrong with you? Are you that selfish?" People were staring. The valet attendants, a line of bored-looking young men in red jackets, were now watching with undisguised interest. The maitre d' had followed them to the door, his expression one of pained professionalism. Arthur remained silent. He knew that any word he spoke would be a lie, and lies were a luxury he couldn't afford. His silence was a shield, but to Melissa, it was gasoline on a fire. It was confirmation of her every negative belief about him. "See, David?" she spat, turning to her husband. "He doesn't even have the decency to answer me. He doesn't care." He's just a stubborn, senile old man who enjoys humiliating us. David stepped forward. Dad, please, just tell me you're okay. His voice was pleading, but Arthur's focus was elsewhere. He was scanning the street, the cars, the faces of the people passing by. He was assessing threats, reawakening a dormant part of his brain that saw the world in terms of angles, cover, and escape routes. That's when the observer saw him. He was a young valet, no older than 22, named Chris. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at the drama of the woman yelling. He was looking at the old man. Chris had done a 4-year stint in the Marines, a peacetime tour that had felt more like a job than a calling, but it had taught him to see things. It had taught him to recognize a certain posture, a certain way of carrying oneself. The old man wasn't cowering or confused. He was contained. His shoulders were back, his head was up, and his eyes were constantly moving, not with fear, but with an unnerving, systematic clarity. He looked like the gunnery sergeant who had run Chris's boot camp, a man who seemed calm on the surface but vibrated with a terrifying level of controlled energy. As Arthur finally pulled his arm free from Melissa's grasp and reached for his car keys, his sleeve rode up his wrist for a second. Under the soft glow of the valet stand's light, Chris saw it. It was faded, the lines blurred by age, but it was unmistakable. A stylized eagle, its wings spread, clutching a downward-pointing dagger in its talons. Chris had seen symbols like it before, in old books and hushed conversations among veteran instructors. Tattoos that belonged to units that weren't on any official list. SOG, Delta, and other even quieter groups. This was one of those. It sent a jolt through him. This was not some senile old man. This was someone else entirely. Arthur took his keys from the valet board himself, nodding once to the stunned attendant. He walked to his car, a 10-year-old, unassuming American sedan, and got in. He started the engine, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb without a single backward glance. He left David and Melissa standing there, bathed in the glow of the fancy restaurant, choking on their anger and public embarrassment. As the taillights disappeared around the corner, Chris the valet shook his head, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing for sure. The crazy woman had been yelling at the wrong man. The drive home was a silent, bitter war. Melissa was a coiled viper in the passenger seat, her fury radiating in waves. David gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of anger, confusion, and a deep, gnawing sense of shame. When they finally stepped into the sterile perfection of their condominium, the dam of Melissa's restraint broke. "That's it, David. I am done," she began, her voice echoing in the minimalist space. "I have put up with his moods, his silence, his complete and utter lack of gratitude for years. But this public humiliation, this is the final straw. There is something seriously wrong with him. We need to get him evaluated. We need to get power of attorney. This isn't normal behavior for anyone, let alone an old man who should be grateful we even bother with him." Her words were a torrent, a well-rehearsed litany of grievances that had been building for years. David, exhausted and emotionally battered, found his defenses crumbling. The evidence, from her perspective, was overwhelming. His father had acted erratically, irrationally. He had abandoned them, embarrassed them. For the first time, David started to seriously entertain the idea that Melissa was right. Maybe his father, the quiet, steady rock of his childhood, was finally succumbing to the ravages of age. Maybe his mind was going. The thought was a profound, soul-crushing sorrow, but it also offered a simple explanation for the inexplicable. What if he's a danger to himself? Melissa pressed, seeing her advantage. Driving off like that in his state? We have to do something. We have a responsibility. David sank onto their designer sofa, the expensive leather offering no comfort. I'll call his doctor in the morning," he conceded, his voice heavy with defeat. "We'll see what she says." The concession was all Melissa needed. She had won. She had finally convinced David that his father was a problem to be solved, not a person to be respected. As she began to pace, already planning the logistics of doctors and lawyers, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from their front door. It wasn't the tentative rap of a neighbor or the buzz of a delivery person from the lobby. It was sharp, official, and it cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. They looked at each other, Melissa's triumphant rant cut short. David, with a sense of rising dread, walked to the door and looked through the peephole. He saw two men in plain clothes and two uniformed police officers standing in the hallway. His blood ran cold. He opened the door a few inches. The lead man, a detective with tired eyes and a grim expression, held up a badge. "David Vance?" he asked, his voice all business. David nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm Detective Miller, this is Detective Sanchez. We have a warrant to search the premises in connection with an ongoing investigation." Melissa, hearing this, rushed to the door. "A warrant? A warrant for what? This is absurd." The detective's gaze flickered to her, unimpressed. "The warrant is in relation to a federal investigation into corporate espionage and data theft at your employer, Omnicorp, Mr. Vance." The words landed like body blows. Omnicorp, espionage. David's world tilted on its axis. "What? That's impossible," he stammered. "I'm a vice president there." Melissa, who just moments before had been wielding authority over her father-in-law, was now faced with a power far greater than her own. "You can't just come in here," she protested, her voice shrill. Detective Miller gave a humorless smile. "Ma'am, we can and we will." The uniformed officers moved past them into the apartment. One of them was a young, sharp-eyed patrolman named Evans. He took up a position by the door, his face impassive, but his eyes taking in everything. The detectives began their work, professional and methodical. They headed straight for David's home office. The power dynamic had been violently inverted. David and Melissa were no longer the arbiters of judgment. They were the subjects of it, their perfect lives about to be torn apart under the cold, indifferent scrutiny of the law. And the old man who was the cause of their earlier frustration was nowhere to be seen. The search was a quiet violation. The detectives, Miller and Sanchez, moved through the apartment with a practiced efficiency that was terrifying to watch. They were polite but implacable. They opened drawers, sifted through papers, and, most importantly, zeroed in on David's work laptop and home server. David and Melissa were instructed to sit on their own sofa, reduced to helpless spectators in the dismantling of their privacy. David's mind was racing, trying to make sense of the nightmare. Espionage? It was preposterous. He was a loyal employee, a high performer. He couldn't fathom how he could be implicated in something so serious. Melissa was silent for once, her face pale, the sheer gravity of the situation finally penetrating her bubble of self-importance. "Mr. Vance?" Detective Miller said, turning from the laptop with a grim look. "The breach we're investigating was massive. It appears to have originated from a network access point assigned to you. A backdoor was opened from this very IP address 3 hours ago." "That's impossible," David insisted, his voice trembling. "I was at dinner. I haven't touched that computer all evening." "We know you were at dinner," Sanchez countered, not looking up from his notes. "The breach was timed to happen while you had a public alibi. It makes you look either very guilty or very stupid." Just as the weight of his predicament was about to crush him, the intercom from the building's front desk buzzed. David flinched. One of the uniformed officers, Evans, answered it. "Go ahead, Frank," he said into the receiver. The security guard's voice crackled through. "Officer Evans, you're not going to believe this. I've got a General Sterling down here. Insists on coming up. Says it's a matter of national security and he needs to speak with the ranking detective on site." Evans looked at Miller, his eyebrows raised. Miller sighed, annoyed at the interruption. "A general? What general? Tell him we're in the middle of a police investigation." Before Evans could relay the message, the elevator down the hall dinged. The detectives and officers instinctively looked toward the open apartment door. A man stepped out of the elevator. He was in his late 60s, but he moved with the purpose and coiled energy of a man half his age. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored dark gray suit, but it did little to conceal the ramrod-straight posture and the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer of the highest rank. He radiated an aura of absolute, inviolable authority. This was General Marcus Sterling, retired, though men like him never truly retired. He strode down the hallway and into the apartment as if he owned the building. He didn't knock. He didn't ask for permission. His presence was its own warrant. He completely ignored David and Melissa. His sharp, intelligent eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept the room, cataloging the detectives, the officers, the situation, in a single comprehensive glance. His gaze landed on Detective Miller. "You're in charge here?" Sterling's voice was calm, but it was a calmness that held immense power, the kind of voice that could command armies and move nations. Detective Miller, a 20-year veteran of the force, found himself standing a little straighter. "I am Detective Miller. And you are?" "General Marcus Sterling," he replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. He reached into his jacket and produced a slim leather case, flipping it open to reveal a set of credentials that made Miller's eyes widen. The identification was not from any standard branch of the military. It was from an office so obscure and powerful that Miller had only ever heard rumors of its existence. "Detective?" Sterling said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more commanding. "As of this moment, your investigation is over. This apartment and everything in it is now under the authority of my office by order of the National Security Act, Section 4. This is a Level 4 security matter. You and your men will cease all actions and await my instructions. Is that understood?" Miller, completely outranked and outmaneuvered, could only nod. "Yes, sir. Understood." The power in the room had just shifted, absolutely and irrevocably. Detective Miller, now completely deferential, holstered his sidearm as a sign of compliance. "General," he said, his voice tight, "with all due respect, we have actionable intelligence of a significant data breach, a matter of severe corporate and potentially economic security, originating from this location. We have a legal warrant." General Sterling cut him off, not with rudeness, but with an authority so absolute it rendered the detective's words irrelevant. "What you have, Detective," Sterling began, his voice a low, resonant instrument of command, "is the very tip of an iceberg. You have the footprint of a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation that has been targeting Omnicorp's Defense Research Division for the better part of a year. An operation we have been tracking." He turned his piercing gaze upon David, then Melissa, who seemed to shrink under the intensity of his scrutiny. "An operation that selected your son, Mr. Vance, as its unwitting delivery system. Perfect patsy. A high-level executive with the right security clearances but no reason to suspect he was being targeted." Melissa made a small, choked sound. David was frozen, hanging on the general's every word. "They didn't hack your son, Detective?" Sterling continued, his tone becoming instructive, as if lecturing a class of cadets. "They played a much longer, smarter game. They infected him. A piece of custom malware, delivered via a compromised file from a trusted vendor months ago. It lay dormant, invisible to any security scan, waiting. Tonight was the activation night. At precisely 2,100 hours, it was programmed to awaken, exfiltrate nearly a terabyte of classified data on next-generation drone guidance systems, and then, as a final, elegant cruelty, trigger a series of system alerts that would irrevocably frame your son as the architect of the entire theft. He would have been arrested by you. The FBI would have taken the case. He would have been charged with economic espionage, possibly treason. He would have disappeared into the federal prison system for the rest of his natural life. His life would have been over. He paused, letting the full, horrifying weight of his words sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Melissa's ragged breathing. "That was the plan," Sterling said, his voice dropping even lower. "It was a good plan, almost perfect, but it had a single catastrophic flaw, a variable their meticulous intelligence gathering could never have accounted for." He looked pointedly at David. "They didn't know who your father was." His gaze shifted toward the open doorway. And as if on cue, Arthur Vance stepped quietly into the apartment. He looked small and unassuming next to the towering presence of the general. His old slacks and worn jacket a stark contrast to Sterling's tailored suit. But his arrival changed the entire atmosphere of the room. He was the missing piece of the puzzle, the quiet center around which this entire storm was raging. The general's entire demeanor transformed. The icy, commanding officer vanished, replaced by a man looking at his superior, his mentor, his hero. The respect in his eyes was profound, boundless. It was reverence. They knew David Vance was an executive, Sterling said, his voice now filled with a deep, resonant pride. They didn't know he was the son of a man my community called the Ghost. They didn't know his father was Sergeant Major Arthur Vance, the most decorated, most effective, and most brilliantly silent operator in the entire history of the Joint Special Operations Task Force 7. A unit whose existence the government will deny until the end of time. They had no idea their target's father was the man who single-handedly dismantled the Serpent's Coil Arms Syndicate in Eastern Europe in 1998. The man who held the pass at Al-Qut against overwhelming odds for 72 hours, alone, after his entire team was compromised, allowing critical intelligence to escape. The man whose name is a legend whispered with a mixture of fear and awe in the intelligence headquarters of every major world power from Langley to Beijing. They picked a fight with a lion because they thought he was a lamb. General Sterling took a step toward Arthur, the gesture one of deep respect, closing the distance between two worlds. "Detective, your warrant brought you here looking for a criminal," he stated, his voice ringing with conviction. "But the only reason you didn't find one is because of this man." He gestured to Arthur. The message he received at dinner tonight, the one that made him leave so abruptly, was an automated signal from a deep-cover monitoring system called Watcher. It's a program Sergeant Major Vance himself helped design 2 decades ago. It lies dormant, scanning global communications for digital signatures, keywords, and traces of code associated with our former adversaries. The malware used to compromise your son's computer, David, was brilliantly disguised, but its core architecture was written by a cyber-terrorist Arthur personally tracked and neutralized in the Balkans 20 years ago. A man with a very specific, very arrogant coding style. The Watcher system recognized that signature. It cross-referenced it with active friendly assets in the vicinity. Found you, David, and it found your father. It then did exactly what it was designed to do. It sent a condition black alert to the only man on Earth who could decipher the threat and act on it in time. Sterling's eyes locked with Arthur's. Standard Ghost protocol. Go. Now. No comms. An order that requires absolute blind faith. An order that demands you abandon everything, burn your cover if necessary, and follow the directive without question. Because hesitation, in our world, isn't just a weakness. It's a contagion that gets people killed. He turned his gaze back to the stunned group, his voice a hammer striking an anvil. So while you, he looked at Melissa, were berating him for his selfishness, and you, he looked at David, were questioning his sanity, Arthur Vance was doing what he has always done. He was going to work. He left that restaurant and drove to a pre-designated, Level 3 emergency dead drop location that hasn't been active in 15 years. An old, abandoned newsstand in the industrial district. There, hidden in a loose brick, was a small, hardened device. With that device, he sent a single, encrypted, one-way burst transmission. It was nothing more than a ping. But that one ping to our systems was a screaming siren. It not only confirmed a Level 4 threat against a protected asset was active and real, it triggered a network-wide counterprotocol that our cyber command has been waiting years to deploy. In an instant, the foreign agents were surgically locked out of your son's system. But it didn't just lock them out. It ensnared them. It fed them a continuous loop of phantom data, making them think their download was proceeding, while our systems mapped their entire network infrastructure, identified their physical locations, and fed that actionable intelligence to tactical teams we had on standby around the globe. As we speak, a half-dozen high-value foreign operatives are being apprehended in Berlin, Tokyo, and right here in this city. A multi-million-dollar intelligence cell, decapitated. A catastrophic breach of national security. Averted. All of it, All of it because one quiet old man got a text message at dinner and did his duty. Without praise, without explanation, and without hesitation. The camera of the narrative would zoom in on Melissa's face. It was a ruin. The smugness, the arrogance, the condescension. All of it had been burned away, leaving only the raw, hideous structure of her own ignorance. The shame was a physical force, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. She looked at Arthur, this quiet man she had dismissed as a clerk typist, this burden, this failure, and for the first time in her life, she saw him. She saw the giant who had been living in their midst, and she wanted to shrink into nothingness. The lead detective, Miller, a man who had seen it all, walked slowly over to Arthur, his face a mixture of awe and profound apology. "Sir," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sergeant Major, we had no idea." Arthur, his face weary from the sudden resurrection of his old life, simply gave the detective a small, tired nod of acknowledgement. He sought no apology. He required no praise. The mission was complete. That was all that ever mattered. The aftermath of the revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy as smoke. General Sterling, his purpose achieved, moved to finalize the situation. "Detective Miller," he said, his voice returning to its official, commanding tone. "You and your men are dismissed. Your department will receive a formal, sealed notification from the Department of Defense within the hour. Your official report will state that your investigation into David Vance was concluded, and he has been fully and completely cleared by the intervention of a superseding federal authority. You will make no mention of my name or of Sergeant Major Vance's. You were never here. This conversation never happened. Is that clear?" "Crystal, sir," Miller replied without hesitation. He turned to his men. "Pack it up. We're done here." The detectives and officers began to gather their equipment, their movements now subdued, respectful. They avoided looking at David and Melissa, but they all cast glances of pure, unadulterated awe at the quiet old man standing by the window. As they filed out, Officer Evans, the young patrolman, paused at the door. He caught Arthur's eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of profound respect from one serviceman to another, a silent acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. The apartment door clicked shut, leaving Arthur, Sterling, David, and Melissa in a cavernous, echoing silence. It was David who finally broke it, his voice a raw, cracking whisper. "Dad," he started, taking a step forward. "Dad, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." The words were inadequate, pathetic pebbles thrown into the Grand Canyon of his own ignorance. Arthur turned from the window. He looked at his son, his only child, and his face was not filled with anger or triumph or even "I told you so." It was filled with a deep, bone-weary sadness. "You weren't supposed to know, David," he said softly. "That was the whole point." Melissa was weeping now, silent, shoulder-shaking sobs of pure shame. She couldn't speak. What could she possibly say? How could she apologize for years of relentless, condescending disrespect? How could she bridge the gulf between the small, pathetic man she had created in her mind and the monumental hero who stood before her? The man who had just saved her husband, her life, her entire world. Arthur's gaze drifted to her, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something that might have been pity. He walked past them, his limp seeming more pronounced in the quiet of the room. He didn't want their apologies, their newfound awe, their frantic attempts to recalibrate their entire relationship with him. He had lived without their respect for 2 decades. He certainly didn't need it now. He had his honor. It was the only thing he had ever truly owned. General Sterling placed a firm, comforting hand on Arthur's shoulder. "The car is waiting downstairs, Ghost," he said, his voice gentle. "We need a full debrief. Then we'll take you home." Arthur nodded, a simple, final gesture. He was ready to return to his world of quiet solitude. He started for the door, the general by his side. He paused in the doorway and looked back at his son, who stood broken in the middle of his perfect, shattered life. Arthur's final words were not for himself. "Take care of your wife," he said. It was not a judgment or a command. It was a simple, final piece of fatherly advice. Then he and the general were gone, leaving David and Melissa alone in the wreckage of their certitude. The silence they were left with was a living thing, filled with the crushing weight of the truth. Their world had been saved, but their perception of it, and of themselves, had been irrevocably destroyed. The lesson had been delivered not with a lecture, but with the quiet, devastating thunder of a life of unseen, unimaginable sacrifice. The final scenes of this story are quiet, reflective, bathed in the soft, forgiving light of a new dawn. We see Arthur Vance back in his small, third-floor apartment. The storm has passed. The ghosts of his past have receded, for now, back into the shadows where they belong. He is sitting in his worn armchair, the one that faces the window, looking out not at the city, but at something far beyond it. He is at peace. The quiet is not a void. It is a presence, a hard-won sanctuary. His hands are resting on his knees, and on the windowsill next to him, the small, dark river stone catches the morning light, a silent sentinel to a lifetime of kept promises. The camera, in a slow, reverent zoom, drifts down to his wrist. His watch jostled during the night's events, has ridden up his arm, fully revealing what the valet, Chris, had only glimpsed. The tattoo. The faded blue-black ink of an eagle in flight, its talons gripping a downward-pointed dagger. The symbol of Task Force 7. The mark of the ghost. It is not a boast. It is a scar. It is a memorial. It is the only medal he will ever wear. The narrator's voice returns, filled with a tone of reverent awe. Honor, you see, is not a loud and bombastic thing. It does not stand on stages or demand recognition. It doesn't write books about its achievements or boast of its conquests in crowded rooms. True honor lives in the quiet heart. It is forged in the crucibles of sacrifice and cooled in the waters of humility. It is a silent, unbreakable promise, a vow kept in the deepest darkness, so that others, unknowing and undeserving, may live their lives in the light. Arthur Vance saved his son. He saved his family's future. He thwarted an international incident. He did not do it with a gun or a speech or a confrontation. He did it with a lifetime of discipline distilled into a single silent act of obedience to a code of honor his own family never knew he lived by. He did it by getting up from a dinner table and walking away. Now, we turn to you, the members of our community. How many heroes like Arthur Vance walk among us every single day? How many quiet old men and women whom we pass on the street, whom we dismiss as slow or out of touch, are carrying the weight of stories we cannot even imagine? What does true strength, true courage, really look like in this modern world? Is it the person with the loudest voice and the most followers? Or is it the person who does the right thing when no one is watching, expecting no reward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, because your perspectives are what give these stories their true meaning. If the story of quiet heroism and profound sacrifice moved you, if it reminded you that there is more to people than what we see on the surface, please consider subscribing to Stories of a Silent Age and sharing this video with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of unseen honor. Because in a world that grows louder every day, it is more important than ever to listen for the silence, to see the unseen, and to honor the quiet heroes. Thank you for watching.